Okay, I'm the anti-climax tonight, so anyway. Oh, it's auto-playing. How about come back with my show? All right. Hi, everybody. I'm still Jeff McGee. And I just, let's give another hand to our previous speakers. I think they were just wonderful. If I could do that kind of stuff in WebGL that Michael showed us. It was a little more accessible in some ways. If we could do this, anybody can. So I'll tell you about myself a little bit. I'm the creative director for media and communications at the Bill Lane Center for the American West. It's a very long title. In short, I am a journalist who's sort of embedded in an academic research center at Stanford University. Been there for just over 2 years now. Our interests are broad. We look at the past, present, and future of the western part of North America. We're interested in 3 major subject areas: economy and public policy, resources and the environment, and history and culture. So really, the past as expressed by history and culture, the present, economy and public policy, and then the future looking at climate science and habitats. And there's another layer on top of that. We're very interdisciplinary. We work with scientists and with historians, and with literature scholars, and with journalists, certainly. But on top of that, there's this whole thing of data visualization and multimedia for explanation and exploration. And so that's where I come in. And so I work across these 3 sort of content verticals, if you were to call this a media company. Let me tell you a little about myself. Before that, I've spent quite a bit of time in online news. So there I was at ABC News, at the New York Times for some time, and then before I came to Stanford, I was at Le Monde in France. And here's some of my work, ranging from information graphics to sort of audio and photos, and video as well. In fact, the first thing I did out of journalism school was I ended up at ABC News. They wanted to do a product that would take their information graphics and make them accessible to kids. 8 to 12-year-olds, tweens as they call it. So the idea was that you couldn't just take an information graphic. It didn't have the entire story in it. You had all this exposition, all this basic story that came in a 700-word article, and then the information graphic sort of enhanced that. So the idea here was, well, what if we did something that was like a comic book? And this was '99, so there were a lot of people on dial-up. So a lot of this was vector illustration that was then rendered in Flash, and so it gave me a lot of control over the palettes. Bright and brighter. but also I had this idea of Brady Shepherd Ferry that you could trace images, and that meant you could use any one you wanted. So actually I had a lot of fun with this. It was sort of like this idea you could take a long story that maybe a child might be someone who's just arriving on the scene and might not have the backstory, and so it's your chance to break down a complex subject. If you break it down into enough smaller components, almost like prime factoring a large number, I think you can explain a lot of things. And I think this has informed my thinking for a long time ever since then. It's pretty monomedia in a sense. It was text and images. Soon after that, I was at the New York Times, and I think that this speaks to something I want to say about transmedia and about multimedia. That the internet is this huge database of stuff, and it gets richer and richer all the time. And in a sense, like, we need to build a user interface to match the richness that's contained within it. And we still haven't quite figured out how to contextualize all this information and turn it into stories, turn it into experiences. Not for lack of trying. So this is, sometime back, I guess about a decade ago now, that I was at the New York Times working mostly in Flash. And we had an extraordinary amount of content that, obviously could be described as reporting, but was also staff photography. We had, we were one of the few publications that still had photographers stationed all over the world in bureaus who were going out on assignment. And a lot of their stuff was just showing up in the newspapers, 1 picture or 2 pictures a day. It was really a lot of underused content there. The information graphics desk, I was the only person there to translate their graphics into online interactives. And as you can see now, what happened when they beefed up to 10, 12 people who can do online graphics. So you see how much latent talent there was there. But anyway, so another thing that was going on at this point was that people were getting more broadband. You could load sound and video, and you had this application, this authoring environment, Flash, that let you combine all these things together. And so in a sense, we're sort of where we are now, to some extent. We started looking for ways to kind of encapsulate what we were doing so we could produce stories more quickly. And in a sense, it was like we had all these different content streams. We had all the photographs that were coming in. We had information graphics. We had the reportage, which we would put it in the form of audio narration. We had video sometimes. And so what we did was almost like a mixing board. We had like these different tracks where in a particular linear sequence you could have a photo and then a graphic and then a video clip or something like that. And the idea was you were trying to basically throw the best material you had about a particular story at your audience as quickly as you could. This is an all-flash site that I built back in 2005, I guess, for a documentary film that we did in collaboration with a Canadian broadcasting company. That was sort of like the extreme moment of this database that I built to author content, and pretty much didn't go much further than that. But it was kind of interesting, the idea of like what are the design patterns in your multimedia that you're using again and again that can help you sort of create a structure that you don't have to worry about. Can I do this thing? Yes, you can. But how do I make it? How do I really make it interesting, centered around the story? And I'm not going to go too much into these old stories right now. So then I went to Le Monde, and one of the things I noticed, other than the fact that my French was not very good, and that was a problem, or that the electoral college system is maybe a little silly. You try to explain it to people in other countries. Another thing was, by the late aughts, public data was becoming really a big deal, and we were getting access to so much information. I think a lot of us who were working in information graphics had dealt with data in a much more artisanal, sort of manual way. And there was this thing called data visualization that was coming along. Like Michael's colleague Aaron Colin did that animation called Flight Patterns, which was like an acid trip for me. It blew my mind. And, I realized I don't know how to do that. I need to go back to school. And I found my way to Stanford and did a fellowship there a couple of years ago. And that resulted, during my time there, I interviewed a lot of people in the profession and found out what are sort of, what's their philosophy, what are they thinking about, how do you tell stories with data? I guess that's one of the open questions tonight. I guess you could find out just by going to datajournalism.stanford.edu. That's a very simplistic way to put it. But I do, if you're interested, check it out. It's an hour long, but it's broken up into chapters, and there's a podcast also. And the video format as a somewhat enhanced, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. Data visualization, not the prime topic tonight, but I want to talk a little bit about it. How do you tell stories with data? A lot of excitement about this possibly medium. Information, wholesale information being drawn into visual artifacts that explain things and entertain. This is Eric Rodenbeck from Stamen, who's in the video. But then there's people saying, well, these visual forms, you get something out of it. It's complicated, but are you really getting a narrative? This is Nigel Holmes, a renowned information graphics designer. Completely incomprehensible, he says. And then Jeff Hare, who's one of my instructors at Stanford, he did a project to basically survey, kind of a census of information graphics in the media, and they found some interesting patterns that they turned into a paper. This is Jeff Hare and Eddie Siegel, who was a master's student at the time. And they realized that information graphics draw from a lot of other genres, including video games, as we heard before, cinema even, but also printed formats like there was one they called the science fair poster, and the example they used was of Barry Bonds' home runs. It was like this big graphic in the middle and lots of little sort of small multiples underneath. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about this either. I'm just going to direct you to this. And in fact, the link for this is in the documentary. But what I wanted to do before the panel starts, if this panel is ever going to start, is just some of the work I've been doing the past couple of years and what I'm trying to do with it. One is, this is a story we did, okay, so my research center, I'm a journalist in resident. We have media fellowships where we bring in reporters and I work together with them to do interactive media around their story. And we do that because these stories are of interest to us. They fit into our subject area, which, as I said, was Western North America. It's pretty big, it's a big target. One of the forms that they talked about in this paper about data visualization narrative techniques is called the data slideshow. Basically, one thing after the other. So here, this is, I could try to load the interactive version of it. It's much more gracefully animated, but basically, okay, so Texas had a horrible drought last year, followed by a horrible drought for most of the US this summer. This is actually back this spring. The question was like, should they raise water rates? What is the, how does Texas compare to other places? And so here, this is a sort of a double visualization. You've got a spatial view looking at these cities, and then you've got these bar charts showing these 4 stats by city, by selection of cities. And what we've done is we've highlighted the Texas cities, and then what you'll see, when, it works better when it's animated, but basically you'll see when you go to water bill, you see most of the Texas cities sort of plunge to the bottom. And then when you look at usage, you see they start to slide upward. And when you look at average precipitation over the past 5 years, we try to be fair, you see sort of spread out. Houston actually gets a lot more rain than people else, if you took the time to think about it. And then drought. Oh, I guess I didn't include that slide. Anyway, what we also have is this sort of textual narrative up here. It's basically a series of interlinked thoughts. It's a pretty conventional format, but I think that it's important when you have a bunch of different data points and you want to sort of compare them. I think it can be very helpful to just take it slow, take it easy, and really lay it out. So another thing we did here, this is a visualization of 300 years of American newspapers going back to 1690. And what we have is sort of a thumbnail history of American journalism here on the side. If I were to do it again, I'd probably give more space to the text. I don't think I realized I'd have that much to write. But you can also interact with this in a nonlinear way. You can go to any particular year in between. We have a stepper that takes you through the major eras that we're highlighting here. But you can also drill down. You can filter the newspapers by what language they were written in. It's an extraordinary number of non-English publications, particularly towards the early part of the 20th century. You know, German was almost like the main language of the U.S. Anyway, so. But the other thing you can do is you can step through this. And that's a project we did for our so-called Rural West Initiative. It's looking at sort of less reported communities. Another thing, this is sort of like basically you're looking at a database, but it's not supposed to feel like a database. A lot of spatial graphics that we see now, really, they use a web map and then there's a lot of points on it. You click on the points and you get a little speech bubble and so on. What we're trying to do was do something that it didn't feel as databasey. So what we have here is basically, this is a project about the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Half of California's water passes through. It's pretty messed up, and we're a long way from figuring out how to fix it. But the first thing is there was this research group that tried to imagine what it looked like in 1800 when it was pristine. And so what we have is, there's a web map underneath this that has a bunch of different layers of tile sets that show imagery of from the Delta from different times. But then we've got this sort of next and back navigation and the pagination on the bottom. And all you have to do is just sort of step through it. But at different stops, like this is an interactive graphic where you can sort of compare how it looked across 200 years apart. But then there's moments where you're basically just sort of laying type on a base map, and so it's a little like a book, but then you've got sort of top-level navigation on the top. So this is the part where we're sort of taking on a tour. And then here, like the idea was, some of the base maps were very beautiful, and so to zoom in close, let you see the texture of them and the chronological context. But then we use archival images and diaries that have been scanned from the early 1800s, and sort of it's really like paging through kind of a coffee table experience. And it ends up, it's about 22 pages long. The last screen is actually one where you can sort of do nonlinear exploration. You can turn layers on and off, kind of thing you see all the time. But it's that sort of combination of a narrative flow and also, free exploration. And one more thing I think that is sort of more in the transmedia vein is this kind of enhanced video trope that I've been exploring for some years now, starting with the documentary that I did. I think that it lets you have a more compact narrative, but you have more branching off points. Let's say you do something that's like 20 minutes long, so that it can reach a fairly broad audience. But there's some issues you really want to geek out on. We'll bring them up sort of in situ as you reach them. And what we have is a sort of a shopping cart that fills up with sidebar information. And you can pause it and read it, or interact with it as it's there, or you can follow through the entire thing and get to the end. And this is using a technology called Popcorn. It's a new JavaScript library that Mozilla Foundation is pushing. It's true, it's very coder-oriented right now, but they're also working on something called, it keeps changing its name, I think it's WebMaker now. And there's going to be an app that comes out later this year, I think, that will enable you to basically take all sorts of webby widgets, like a Twitter feed or a Google map, a video or several videos, and sort of lay them out both on a screen but also over time, so that as things elapse, you can have different events happen on the page. And I think that's going to be really interesting as we start to really kind of juggle all these media. So in a sense, we're finally reaching that point where, as I said before, that this vast storehouse of content, of information, is something that we can freely pull from, like a big information refrigerator, to sort of lay them out on the plate and enjoy them. So with that, let's move on to the next section. Thank you very much.